Yoba, what's up and what's happening? And today I've got me a cabbage and I've also got me a cube of sugar. And I'm going to tell you a little story and I'm going to let you into a little secret, which actually, when you think about it, it's kind of obvious. So my client the other day comes up to me and she says that she has cut out sugar from her diet. She's cut out sugar from her tea, from her coffee, and she's also cut out things such as chocolate biscuits and sweets and cakes and things like that she tends to have at work. Things that she tends to have a weakness for, she's cut those things straight out. And she also tells me that she's on a carbohydrate reduced diet, which is fine. But then she goes on to tell me that she's actually increased her fruit intake and she's also increased her smoothies in the morning, which are also made of fruit. So after that conversation with my client, it kind of got me thinking that people's perception of what's actually better for you or healthier for you, and actually the reality of what things really are kind of slightly confused, which is why I'm holding this cabbage. This cabbage right here is about 1.2 kilos in weight. It has roughly about 88 grams of carbohydrate. It's about 1.9 grams of fat in here, and it's roughly about 17 grams of protein. It also has things such as vitamins K, vitamin A, and also vitamin C. And it also has some magnesium and potassium in it as well, which is all very useful for you when it comes to your body. This cube of sugar here, which I have in my hand, is also 88 grams worth of carbohydrate. And other than it being a cube of sugar and it being worth 88 grams of carbohydrate, it has absolutely fuck all else going for it. So I wanted to explain something to you that may not seem quite so obvious, but when I do explain it to you, you're going to think to yourself, shit. Okay, play the intro. Come on. So, what's sometimes easy to forget and misconstrued is that all sugar has to come from a plant. And that's because all plants have carbohydrate in them, and that is due to the fact that they photosynthesize when they are in the sun. So all plants, all fruits, all vegetables are basically grown because they grow in sunlight. Well, I guess not much does grow without sunlight, but plants, fruits and vegetables, they all grow within sunlight. So they all produce carbohydrate because photosynthesis is responsible for that. So what's easily misconstrued is that all plant-based foods such as vegetables have carbohydrate in them, and all things such as sugar have basically been processed from that plant. And that's where I think we start to get a little bit confused. When it comes to people such as my client who have removed sugar from their tea and coffee and they've stopped eating cakes on their lunch breaks, that's all very well and good, but they don't realize what they have just done is increase the amount of sugar that they're intaking by the amount of fruit and smoothies that they're having. Now, what may not be quite so obvious to people is that all sugar originates from a plant. Anything such as a vegetable or a fruit has got carbohydrate in it, and that carbohydrate has come from photosynthesis. Photosynthesis has come from sunlight, and when sunlight reacts with a plant, it has a chemical or a biochemical reaction which creates carbohydrate. What we then do is we then harvest that vegetable or fruit and then we process it, and then that's what gives us our sugar. So when you're looking at carbohydrate, most of the carbohydrate that you find in your diet originates from a plant. But we can't actually produce our own carbohydrate, or most of the time we need our carbohydrate from our food source. Therefore, when we consume carbohydrate, what happens is we turn that carbohydrate into a simple sugar, which is called glucose. Glucose is one form of energy in where our body creates energy, and we use that energy to be able to live exercise, and lead healthy lifestyles. So when we consume glucose, or when we consume sugar, or anything such as a plant-based food such as fruits and vegetables, that is basically stored, and it's stored within our muscles and it's stored within our liver. But when it needs to be used, that glucose gets broken down into something called ATP. ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, is basically where glucose or any other fuel is being burnt. And that's pretty much all you need to know. But if the body isn't going to use glucose and convert it into ATP, then what happens is that glucose gets stored in the muscle and also gets stored in the liver. But it doesn't get stored as glucose, it gets stored in a cluster. And that cluster of glucose is called glycogen. So when we're being active and we're doing physical exercise and we're using our brains when we're at work, our body will basically call upon our glycogen stores, which are inside our muscle tissue. Those glycogen stores will then be turned back into glucose, and that will be used to produce ATP. So your body can store roughly around 200 grams of glycogen, which is in the muscle tissue, and it's also in the liver. And when your body needs to use that, it converts it back into glucose, and that's burnt, and that process goes on forever and ever. But what happens when you start to overconsume your carbohydrates? So basically too much sugar. What happens then? Well, basically when you start to consume too much sugar, your body can't use those muscle stores anymore, because there's only a limit of roughly about 200 grams depending on the size of the person. So what happens is that if the person starts to consume too much sugar, that sugar is stored as fat. It's stored as subcutaneous fat, and it's also stored as visceral fat. And this is where the problem starts to lie. So when you're trying to be healthier and you're trying to reduce the amount of sugar in your diet, what you need to make sure is that you don't replace that sugar with another form of carbohydrate, because it's going to do just exactly the same thing as what you're trying to undo. I mean, if you were to try to consume all 88 grams of carbohydrate in this cabbage, one, it would probably be pretty much impossible to do. And the second thing is that you would probably shit for days. But when you're looking at highly processed foods, and that includes things such as juices and smoothies, and also having lots of fruit, you're actually having, again, too much sugar, too much carbohydrate, and your body will turn that into fat if you overeat or overconsume the amount of carbohydrate and sugar in your diet. If you're enjoying this video, remember to like and subscribe. So glucose is glucose, and whatever form of carbohydrate you consume, it is converted into glucose, and when it's stored as glycogen. And when your body requires glycogen, it has to release a hormone which is called glucagon. Glucagon is one of the two hormones that are produced in the pancreas. The other hormone is insulin. So glucagon is one of the hormones that stabilizes your blood sugar. And when your blood sugar levels get too low, it basically requires or requests more glycogen. And when it has more glycogen, it's then converted back into glucose, and that glucose is burnt into ATP. But what happens is that when you do something such as run on a treadmill for too long, let's say you run on a treadmill for roughly about an hour, you're burning through your stores too quickly. Your body has only got a certain amount of glucose or glycogen to use. So when you try to do intense levels of exercise, your muscle has only got a certain amount of glycogen, which gets converted back into glucose, to be able to use. And once you pass that usage, once you accelerate too hard with your exercise levels, then your body's going to start to try and find energy from other sources. Now, it would be fantastic if our body started burning fat, but that's probably not going to be that likely. What's more likely to happen is that your body is actually going to start to burn muscle tissue. It will convert muscle tissue back into sugar, and this process is called glyconeogenesis. And this is where I think a lot of you are getting it wrong. Let's say that rather than running on the treadmill for 20 minutes, that you're actually going to run on a treadmill for an hour. That hour's intense exercise is too much for the body to be able to get enough energy to convert it back into ATP. So what happens is the body starts to burn muscle tissue. So what is happening is that you're going for the first 15 to 20 minutes of intense exercise and you're burning up your sugar. But when you go back to eating again, you're more than likely to be consuming some form of carbohydrate. So your glucose will go back into the muscle tissue and it will be stored again. And that will just continue as a cycle forever and ever and ever. But if you start to burn your body too hard when you're exercising, or if you're not consuming enough calories or you're not consuming enough food, what will happen is that your body will just decide to burn muscle tissue instead, and it won't burn fat. And the reason it won't burn fat is basically because it's trying to preserve fat, because fat is a fuel source that is for emergencies, okay? So when you guys are exercising hard, you need to think about things in a little bit of a more reasonable sense as to what your body can and can't do. It can't accelerate really hard for huge lengths of time. What's actually more likely to happen is you're going to waste your muscle tissue, and then it's going to repair and you're going to re-eat, but then you're only taking your muscle tissue from here back down because you're burning it back into sugar again, and then you're going to stop. Your muscle tissue is going to regrow from the food that you eat and the rest that you have, and then when you do another exercise, it's going to go back down again, okay, if you do an intense exercise session. So what you need to make sure that you're doing is that when you're consuming food for your diet, and also when you're exercising, is you need to do these basic key principles. The basic key principles is that you can't undercut your food. You can't undercut because your body will find other ways to use fuel. And yes, it will use some body fat, some subcutaneous fat, and maybe also some visceral fat, and turn those into ketones. And we'll use ketones as a form of energy, but also it will start to use muscle tissue. And that's not what we want. We want to try and keep as much muscle tissue as possible. One, to keep strong, and also to be able to keep lean and athletic and in great shape. And also muscle tissue stores glycogen. So the more muscle tissue you have, the more glycogen you can store and the less fat that you'll store around your body. You know what to do, guys. Like and subscribe, hit the comment section below, and I will get back to you. So how do we get around this problem? Well, it's quite simple. All you need to do is you need to make sure that your activity, when it comes to intense exercise or just exercise in general, such as running, intense walking, jogging, cycling, doing exercise classes, doesn't go too far beyond 20 minutes. Okay, let's use 20 minutes as a rough barrier. I reckon you've probably got about 20 minutes worth of glycogen in your body, which is then converted back into glucose. Once you've done an intense session for roughly about 20 minutes, then what you need to do is you need to either lighten the load of exercise that you're doing and start to turn that notch down, or you can actually start to look at burning fuel in a different way and going to things such as resistance training. When you go to resistance training, you're going to have enough fuel in your body to be able to continue your exercise, and you're also going to have had enough cardiovascular exercise from the first 20 minutes of intense gym routine, or going to a class, or going outside and doing outdoor activity. So that's what I would suggest. I would suggest that you basically break up your workouts or your exercise routines into different segments, so you're using your energy stores better. Now, let's just go back to ketones for a second. So let's imagine that we've changed our exercise routine and we're now focusing on burning our bodies at different intensities of exercise. We're burning at a high intensity and then we're going down to a low intensity. And then, as I've suggested, we're going to use resistance training as that lower intensity. What's going to happen is that your body has now burnt through quite a lot of glycogen and it's burnt out quite a lot of glucose, but you haven't stopped exercising, but you have turned down that intensity. That is absolutely fine. That's a prime opportunity for your body to start using ketones. Okay, so ketosis is basically a fat burning process via function of the liver. When you're doing lower level intense exercise, okay, your body's going to start to use body fat, and that's what everybody wants. Everybody wants to use body fat when they're exercising. So by lowering that amount of intensity, you're going to up the likelihood that your body's going to use ketones instead. This is the most effective and beneficial way to lose body fat over time. Remember to like and subscribe to this video, guys, and catch me in the comment section below. So let's do one last thing, guys. Let's take someone who is on a more ketogenic diet. Okay, let's take someone who has lowered the amount of carbohydrate in their diet overall, and they're not having much carbohydrate, which is not converting back into glucose and not being stored as much as glycogen. They're therefore trying to use their diet to create ketosis more often and more frequently. But this has a massive effect on your output when you're trying to train and when you're trying to be athletic, let's say, or if you're just trying to move more. What you need to understand is that your body does need a certain level of carbohydrate if you are going to do intense exercise. If you choose to undercut your carbohydrate through your diet and then you choose to over exercise, what's going to happen is that you're less likely to hit ketosis and you're more likely to hit glyconeogenesis, which is basically muscle tissue breakdown. So you need to make sure that you understand your energy levels correctly and how you're going to use your energy levels for your performance when you're exercising, for when you're living, when you're having your regular lifestyle, when you're going to work and you're being social at work. So all of those things need to fit into. And if you want to understand a little bit better as to how energy levels work and how your macros work and things of that nature, then catch this video up here. I'll link it above, and you can get a better understanding of your energy expenditure. So the take-home message from this video, guys, for those of you who chose to watch it all the way through, is basically that you don't want to replace one carbohydrate for another. If you're going to knock out sugar, that doesn't mean that you start eating or consuming more carbohydrates foods from plants. And understand that plants includes vegetables and they also include fruit. Now they do have things such as fiber, vitamins and minerals in them, which is very useful. But again, if we're over consuming on those things, the process is exactly the same. So you need to watch out for that. The second thing is as well is that you shouldn't over exercise. If you overindulge in exercise, then you need to be able to fuel for that overindulgence or that intensity. Okay, what I suggest you do is you have an intense level of cardiovascular exercise, such as doing something like a intense run for 20 minutes, an intense cycle, or perhaps you do a class. But remember, when you do things such as classes in gyms, you do tend to have breaks as well. So that's also a good piece of information there. If you want to, and what I teach my clients to do, is that they have some cardiovascular in their PT session when we're working out. They have some cardiovascular movement, some cardiovascular exercise, but then they very quickly go to resistance training. And that's because I know that they've only got a certain level of carbohydrate or glycogen in their muscle tissue. And if I burn that out too quickly, they're going to feel absolutely they're just not going to feel very well at all. So we want to make sure that that hour is spent wisely. So we're going to have a small amount of intense cardiovascular exercise, and then we're going to rest, recuperate, and then we're going to use resistance training as our low level intensity of exercise. If you do decide to take on something such as a ketogenic diet, you need to make sure that you're having enough protein and you're having enough fat to be able to match the lack of carbohydrate that you have in your diet. If you don't, what will happen is that your body will turn to breaking down sugar at a higher or quicker rate, which is basically when the process of glyconeogenesis comes in. So if you're on a ketosis diet and you want to encourage ketones to be used as energy, if you're burning your levels too high in your intense exercise and you're not consuming enough fat and enough protein when you're intaking food, what will happen is your body will start to break down muscle tissue instead, rather than burn body fat. And if you do hit that sweet spot where you have the right amount of protein and the right amount of fat, and you're not burning out too high and you're in a slightly lower calorie deficit, this is the golden egg when it comes to losing body fat. So guys, I hope you liked this video and I hope it taught you something. Remember to like and subscribe. It does help the YT algorithm. And also, if you want to drop a comment in the comment section below, I will get back to you. If you're interested in looking at any other videos that are to do with weight loss or perhaps diabetes reversal, then check out the other videos on my channel. Remember to be fit, be healthy, and of course, be a boss bar.
It's the Yo Series.